Let the thoughts of this I'm sorry. Let the thoughts of this moment be thoughts of tenderness and gratitude. Tenderness because of the person in whose memory we are now gathered. gratitude for all that has been lovable throughout the years, tenderness toward every human frailty, gratitude for a life known intimately and held in honor, gratitude for strong ties of family affection, gratitude for the privilege of knowing and of sharing with one another our experiences of joy and sorrow, gratitude for opportunities to help and care for one another, which enable us to believe that our lives count. We would not be spared the consciousness of sorrow and loss, for as our experience deepens, so too does our understanding of one another deepen. May we win from both our joys and sorrows the wisdom of patience and sympathy, the courage to live faithfully, and the confidence that dark hours may have precious meanings. And may we gain a deepened sense of the sacredness and worth of a life well lived. Amen. Let us find comfort in the words of the ancient sage. God, what are we that you are mindful of us? Indeed, those who come after us, that you take account. Our lives are as vanity, for our days pass away as a shadow. In the morning we flourish and blossom forth. In the evening we are cut down and wither. You turn us to contrition and demand, return, O ye children. If you were wise, you would consider your end, for when you die you shall carry nothing away. Your glory shall not descend after you. But trust this, God does redeem the souls of the servants. None of them who trust shall be forsaken. We affirm Hatzor Tamim Po'olo Ki Chol Drachav Mishpat. Thy work, O God, is perfect, for all thy ways are justice, a God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and right. Who can say, what doest thou? Thou bringest death and giveth life. What mortal can demand of thee? What hast thou wrought? Thou alone, O God, dost righteously apportion both life and death. In thy hand is the destiny of all souls. That will not forget us. Thy mercy will surely abide with us. Blessed art thou, Judge of truth, who dost ordain death and summon us to life. Life offers us the gift of so many blessings. None is more precious than the love of family and friends. In the strength and compassion of parents, in the mutual devotion of husband and wife, of brother and sister, we find the security of our love. The landscape of our years is peopled by the presence of open hearts that exact no price for the gift of themselves. So when a loved one dies, sadness is a normal response. Two people cannot share the best and worst of life in mutual experience and find that absence is trivial. The tribute of love is the pain of separation. We are gathered in this large and loving assembly to pay tribute to the life and give honor to John Klein's memory. How can we not wonder at being in this place at this time? Yes, we knew he was ill, seriously ill. But we also knew that John loved life so much and wanted so much to live for one more day, one more lunch with friends, one more adventure with a grandchild, one more conversation with Lee, one more funny story to retell, or one more Cleveland sports victory to cheer. He wanted to live and keep enjoying life so much, we never quite believed he was going to die. I met him as a bereaved husband. He and Joan built a life of great substance. They taught us that second chances are not only possible, but worth taking. They lived each day with a bedrock love and respect for each other that shone through even in his grief. They inspired us. They set an example for their children and grandchildren that will live on, and their love carried him even after she passed. Because of the couple they were, John was able to keep finding meaning and enjoyment in his life with his incredible group of friends. Leslie, you told me last night how much you enjoyed just being at the lunch table in the company of such history and friendship. Hannah and Ryan, you clearly have found a generation-spanning role model for yourselves and your grandfather. John found the perfect profession for himself as the director of fun, the owner and director of Camp Robin Hood. He knew that camp was about games and vacation and fun, and that it is about so much more as well. Camp is about the life skills of teamwork, cooperation, being on one's own, leadership, and camp is about life itself. The number of campers who became counselors, the number of campers who became friends, and the legions of parents who saw their children grow under the spell of Camp Robin Hood testify to the soundness and worth of a job very well done. He missed it after he retired and was grateful to still be valued by his successors as a contributor. John took his director of fun skills to Oakwood shows and to family life in general. Just being around him made our faces smile and our hearts feel full. He is already missed. But better than I can tell it, please listen to memories of John from those who knew him best. And in this order, I'd like to ask these people to come speak, and I will get out of your way. First, Art, then Michael, grandchildren, and Al. Yes. And you last. Okay. Thank you.
I want to start with an apology to my old buddy John. If our roles were reversed, if he were here for me, he'd do it with such panache, such flair, such humor, and without any notes. I'm going to use notes. And glasses. I like to think of it as a lifelong friendship, but it really goes back only 81 years. I was 7 and I lived at 2265 Chatfield Drive in Cleveland Heights, and I had a wonderful family, 2 lovely sisters, but I yearned for a brother. As if in answer, Johnny Klein moved in with his parents from Shaker Heights to 2295 Chatfield Drive, just 5 doors away. For the next 6 or 7 years, we walked the mile or so to Roxborough Elementary and then to junior high school together. When I was in front of John's house, I'd give him a whistle, and John would come out and we'd start our walk. Those were idyllic pre-war days. We shortcutted part of the way on a dirt path through high grasses across a vacant lot. About the 5th grade, we went high-tech. We strung copper wire along a rear fence past about 5 neighbors' houses, powered it up with those big old dry cell batteries they used to sell, and we were able to lie in our beds at night and tap each other with Morse code. In those days, we were just a wee bit less informed than kids are today. On that diagonal dirt path across the vacant lot, 2 wide-eyed 6th grader lads, John and Art, listened intently to Roger, a worldly wise 9th grader, while he pompously outlined to us the facts of life. We did everything together. We stuffed our galoshes into straps and glided down Kane Park Hill in what we called skiing. We played football endlessly in the street, moving aside once every hour or so as a car meandered down the street. There was always a huge chocolate cake at John's house, and we often had a slice after school. There really wasn't much cake, it was all fudge frosting. Summer only interrupted our friendship when John, at a very early age, journeyed to New Hampshire in his beloved Robin Hood camp. When junior high came along, we continued our walks to school. We both joined the band. I chose a saxophone and John, of all things, a tuba. As we walked our way to school, I carried a tidy sax case. John had a sousaphone wrapped around his neck. It was slightly larger than he. In the 9th grade, politics pitted us against each other. We both ran for the awesome role of president of Roxborough Junior High School. John smeared me. I felt it was an unfair election. Everybody liked John. I came as close to winning as Alf Landon did when he ran against FDR. All through junior high, we stayed close until summer, when once again John sallied forth to his beloved Camp Robin Hood. We went to different high schools and colleges, but remained close. After college and naval service, John came home and faced some tough times, losing his dad at an early age and his kid sister, Leslie. He was in the insurance business but never really liked it. Then his mother became ill, and John dutifully and lovingly cared for her until she passed away. During that time, John managed a small office building our company had built. Each summer, I'd help him stuff a big green leather couch into the back of his van. This couch was in his office. And the couch would go, and John would go up to Camp Robin Hood. In the fall, the couch and John would come back. Then fortune took a turn, and John renewed his friendship with Joan, a friendship that had begun at Roxborough Elementary in the second grade. That long-delayed but exceptionally loving marriage provided John with a family of beautiful girls, all of whom resembled Joan in one way or another. Ronnie and I had the good fortune to visit J&J at camp and to travel with them several times. We were all together on a beautiful morning in Booth Bay Harbor, Maine, when our serenity was interrupted by the horror of 9/11. For the past 30 years or more, I've eaten lunch with John, usually 3 or 4 times a week, and usually at Heinen's. But each summer, the break occurred, and John would travel to beautiful Lake Ossipee and Robin Hood. Now I miss my old friend, but take solace in the thought that he's probably just at Camp Robin Hood for the summer, and I'll see him again before long. Godspeed, good buddy.
Well, I do want this to be a celebration of John's life, but I do want to begin by offering thanks to this family. You guys, you embraced John very early and made him so happy, and he was so proud to be a part of your family. So thank you all very much. For as long as I can remember, John Klein has been a part of our family's lives. John and my mom grew up together as young kids, and John and my dad were high school fraternity brothers. I would interact with John at Oakwood Country Club and family events over the years, but really got to know John in the summer of 1976 when he came to test drive Camp Robin Hood. In 1975, the owners of Robin Hood announced that they were taking the entire camp to the 1976 Olympics that were being held the next summer in Montreal. I later learned that the owners had no idea how they were going to pull this off. When they found that John was going to give that summer a try, they had the perfect guy. So John was given the responsibility of planning, organizing, and being the point person on site at the Olympics. When I got to Montreal, I was teamed with John to get up early each morning and make the donut and coffee run for the entire camp. Now, as you all know, outside of family and friends, there is nothing that John loves more than donuts and coffee. Well, maybe pie and coffee, ice cream and coffee. You get the idea. We bonded over caffeine and sugar. Later that summer, we were chosen to oppose each other as the Camp Green and White captains, and our relationship was pretty much cemented from that point forward. One of the benefits of being a Green and White captain is that you become an honorable judge and are forever invited back to camp to officiate the competition. In the mid-'80s, John had owned the camp for a number of years, and during a break during Green and White, asked several of us back to his bunk to talk about an idea he had. Robin Hood, since its inception, had been an all-boys camp since 1927. Our sister camp, Hiawatha, had recently closed its doors, and John was strongly considering opening the doors to girls. Those of us that had grown up at camp thought this was just about the worst idea we had ever heard. We thought it would completely change the culture of the camp, transition it from a competitive sports camp to an 8-week dating fest. We couldn't have been more wrong. The girls added an incredible dimension. They loved sports, and in many cases, you guys were much more competitive than the boys. What's really interesting is looking back on that day, many of the guys sitting around that room who were the most vociferous objectors to the girls ended up having daughters. The daughters ended up going to Camp Robin Hood, and many of them had life-changing experiences. Another business decision John made that I thought was brilliant was reinstituting a 9th-week camp for families. At the end of 8 weeks of camp, these guys here would furiously pack up the campers, send them home, clean the bunks, and then open the doors to alumni and their families 2 days later for a 9th week. For our family and many like ours, it was an incredible vacation. Our kids were 3 and 5, and for the first time in their lives, they could get up in the morning and make all their own decisions without touching base with mom and dad. And from a parent's standpoint, it was great because we didn't have to worry about them crossing the street. They were in a confined environment. We didn't have to worry about them interacting with strangers. Now think about what's the scariest thing for a young kid before they're about to go off to an overnight camp. And it's the fear of the unknown. By the time these kids were camp age, they already knew the lay of the land, knew many of their counselors, and knew many of their bunkmates from going from years to this 9th-week summer camp. It was a great feeder system into the camp. Last summer was Camp Robin Hood's 90th reunion. And John and I took a road trip to attend. The reunion was well attended by well over 100 people, and many of whom attended worked up at camp while John was the camp director. What made the trip so incredibly special was the number of people that came up to John and shared stories of what a difference he made to their lives. As John would tell you, I was just running the camp trying to survive on a day-to-day basis. I didn't realize I was having any impact, but that was John. Let me share one last story that I really think encapsulates John. While it was almost a rite of passage for campers to break into the kitchen pantry late at night to sneak some food, one group of older kids were really taking advantage of it and leaving quite a mess. The cook was really upset, but John assured her that he would take care of it. So somehow John figured out when they were going to hit next. And that night, late at night, went to the pantry, sat in a chair, and turned out all the lights. Well, sure enough, he could hear the conspiratorial whispers as the kids were approaching the kitchen. Now, you need to understand, the first lesson you learn when you're going to raid the pantry is never turn on the lights. What you do is you kind of feel your way through the kitchen, get to the refrigerator, crack it open, and use the light of the refrigerator to make your way. So picture with me this pitch black room with kids tiptoeing towards the refrigerator. Well, John let the kids get into the kitchen, and as soon as they got close to him, where he was sitting, he simply lifted his flashlight up, lit it underneath his chin, smiled and said, "Hello." Now, I don't know if you've ever seen someone in total darkness light their flashlight up under their chin, but it's really scary. Even if you know that you're looking for it, it is freaky. I go home tonight. Go to your bathroom, bring a flashlight, turn off all the lights, and turn this flashlight on. It will freak you out. Imagine being a 14 or 15-year-old boy, thinking you're home free to the refrigerator, then all of a sudden seeing this head light up in the middle of a room, and in an instant later realizing that the head belongs to the director of the camp. The kids screamed. They were scrambling all over each other trying to get to the door. They ran all the way back to their bunks. Now, John knew who they were, and they knew John knew who they were, and I'm sure they spent the next couple of days trying to figure out what was going to happen next. But John never had to do anything more. Word got around, problem was solved. John handled it with dignity, with class, and with a touch of humor. Pretty much the way he lived his life. Dignified, classy, wonderful sense of humor. A true gentleman, a very, very special man.
Every year at Christmas, amidst the holiday cheer, in a house in Santa Cruz, a frantic scratching fills your ear. The presents lined beneath the tree, adorned with twinkled light, awaiting us still finishing the poems we had to write. The tradition goes back further than all of us alive, and none could write them better than the man named John C. Klein. So today, to give him honor as we lay him down to rest, we wrote this rhyming tribute to emulate the best. He lived life to the fullest, a sentiment we hear a lot. It's one of the greatest lessons all the grandkids always got. He had Oakwood shows and Dartmouth, the Cavs, the Indians, the Browns, who, unlike all his countless friends, nearly always let him down.
For us, there's something special in his passion for the realm, a gift we shared with thousands over his years at the helm. Our youth filled with his stories, we begged our parents to let us go. From then, our summer started with his welcoming, hello. When one of us was homesick, every night he came, but he treated us like all the rest. For anyone, he'd do the same. He shared his humor and his wisdom, and his wide, inviting grin. His heart was always open, and he let the whole camp in. And though we'll always hold those summers dearly in our hearts, it was Christmas that belonged to us, right from the very start.
He'd come across the country to a state of sun and gold. He'd walk down to the beach just to complain that he was cold. From bananagrams to scattergories to our dinners on the pier, his red and green pants and gifts of sweaters every year. We remember the best moments, like when we were leaving in a flurry. Leslie said, "Don't worry, take your time." He quipped, "Have you ever seen me hurry?" Or the way he hoarded pinwheels. Even when he was knocked out, he could hear the package crinkle. "You ate one," he would shout. Or when we all go out and Bonnie wouldn't think she can, so John came out for Christmas and bought her a frickin' van.
He was the greatest gift we ever got from the woman silver-haired, a tailor-made third grandpa from the other half of JK squared. To see the two together was to know the world was right. They were the shining stars to guide you through the night. They were funny, they were witty, and they made each other whole. They weren't just mates, they were two halves of one ever-loving soul.
When she left, our hearts were broken, and we still miss her every day. And though we shared no blood with him, we got to keep him anyway. The lessons that he taught us will stick with us till the end, from how to love to how to laugh to how to be a friend. For as we look around, we know we'll never mourn alone. Though you may no longer be with us, at least you're now with Joan.
My name is Alan Kern. John Tester Klein. We are honoring him today. His father was Lester. His mother was Florence Selman Klein. I told Leslie I'd like to speak a few words about John. Leslie, I lied. I have a lot. No one could say a few words about John. It's not possible. You see, John was a super individual. No, he didn't stop runaway trains, and he didn't leap buildings in a single bound. He was not Superman. He didn't weave a web like Spider-Man to capture individuals. John was a leader. However, he wasn't a leader that led from the front. He wasn't a general on horseback leading behind him his soldiers to follow him. He wasn't that type of a leader. He also wasn't a king whose subjects came to his throne and bowed to him. That was not John Klein. There's a saying in baseball that says there is no I in baseball. There is an I in Klein. However, John was not aware of it. John, as a leader, was president of Roxborough High School, president of his college fraternity, president of his high school fraternity, and when he passed away, he was president of Woodhawk Association. So, John was not an I leader. He was a we leader. He was with us. Whether it was 20 people, 40 people, 60 people, or even 100 people, John was a leader, but he was part of us. That was John's superpower. He had a superpower. And his power was to bond people together forever. There's no one I know like him. As an example, John directed Oakwood country shows. His mother, by the way, was a member of Oakwood, and she was also happened to be a very excellent golfer and other issues. After John's father died, Florence watched John very carefully. She was a lady that was very interested in her son and following his activities. At Oakwood Club, John took a number of male and female members into his Oakwood shows. And using his superpower, which he had, he did not lead them. He bonded them and gave them confidence to sing and dance in front of more than 1,000 people who came to Oakwood Club over the 5-day show period. John once said, "Our show may go to Broadway." Of course, he meant Broadway in Bedford Heights. In 1943, I boarded a train in Cleveland with many other young boys. In those days, we took an overnight train to Boston, Massachusetts. From there, from the South Station of Boston, Massachusetts, we would go to the North Station of Boston, Massachusetts. And from there, we took a train to Center Ossipee, New Hampshire. In attendance today is Stanley Brown. Stanley Brown, uncle and aunt, ran Camp Robin Hood. So if I'm not correct on some of the things that I talk about in those days, I'm sure Stanley will correct me sooner or later. Stanley Brown, by the way, at that time was from Burlington, Vermont. We took the train to Camp Robin Hood in Center Ossipee, New Hampshire. Andy Friedman founded the camp in 1927. However, when I got to the camp, Andy Friedman was an unusual person. First of all, he was a football player from Syracuse, at Syracuse. He was from White Plains, New York. and he was a physical specimen, a very, very handsome, staunch individual. I don't know where he got the idea of calling his camp Robin Hood, but I will tell you that he followed through with every possible connection to Robin Hood. His cabins were green and white. Our shirts were green and white. The shirts were named after Robin Hood, family, location in Nottingham Port, and so forth. So when we write, I say, and also, the groups at Camp Robin Hood in those days were the Tinkers, the Pagers, the Squires, the Yeomen, the Friars, and the Foresters. As I say, Andy Friedman, the way he did things, when he did them correctly. So I became a squire at Camp Robin Hood in 1943. And the yeoman group were John and Stanley, I believe. And also the youngest son of Andy Friedman, Drew Friedman. John and Drew go very close as campers, extremely close. As I say, we had green and white competition, which I still believe continues at Camp Robin Hood. I will explain why there were so many Clevelanders on the train as follows. As I say, the camp was founded in 1927. Several years after the camp was founded, my understanding was there was a terrible fire, and the camp burned down or almost burned down. But Andy had a relative in Cleveland, and Cleveland families, including John's father, Red Garson, who was Johnny Garson's father, Eddie Joseph, who was Bobby Joseph's father, and others, contributed to help Andy rebuild this camp. I believe I shouldn't say they gave the money. I think they loaned the money. But whatever the situation was, I can't answer that. But since that time, the early 30s or late 20s, Clevelanders, many Clevelanders, I could name maybe a lot then, and there may be some today, but many Clevelanders, when I got on that train, there were many Clevelanders, some who became my high school fraternity brothers, as John did when I was a little older. But that was the Cleveland connection to Camp Robin Hood. In the late 1970s, maybe late 1970s, Andy Friedman passed away. He had 3 sons, Andy Friedman. The oldest was Major, who lives today, I believe. Major ran Camp Hiawatha, which was the sister camp of Camp Robin Hood, and it was located in Keyser Falls, Maine. Miles, a middle child, had died. So running the camp was turned over to Drew, the youngest son, Drew Friedman. Drew lived in Connecticut at that time and was heavily involved in real estate. He really did not want to run the camp. And so he thought of his old friend, John Klein. So he called John, as Michael has already mentioned to some degree. He said, "Would you please run Camp Robin Hood?" John was selling insurance at that time. John, by the way, graduated Roxborough High School. He then went to Cleveland Heights High School. He then went to Dartmouth, where he was a cheerleader. And then he went into the Navy, as you saw by today's ceremony. John was on a boat in the Mediterranean, and he enjoyed his service over there. He came back to Cleveland to run the family company, which was called Wovenwright. Wovenwright was a textile company founded by his grandfather. They made socks under the Wovenwright name. That company collapsed, and John liquidated it. As Michael said, he then went into insurance. I believe it was New England Life Insurance, but I could be wrong. And he sold insurance, and his office was in one of Art Merriman's buildings, which Art was a builder. When Drew called, he was surprised. John was at Andy Friedman's funeral, by the way. But he was surprised to some degree. However, considering his mother, Florence, ran a children's girls' camp called Jolly Juniors in Cleveland, John already had camping in his past. I spoke earlier about John Klein, the leader. He wasn't Superman. He wasn't Spider-Man. He wasn't a general of an army. He was not a king. So, who was John Klein? John Klein, I believe, John Klein was Robin Hood. He was Robin Hood. Robin Hood lived in Sherwood Forest. John Klein lived on Thistle Trail. John Klein stole from the rich. I say that humorously, because the only time John took money was from people who were paying to have their kids go to the camp. And John, he didn't give to the poor. He gave to everybody. Everybody he met, John gave to. In any case, as it is well known, John did become the head of Camp Robin Hood. Drew would visit before camp. By the way, before Camp Robin Hood begins, the staff gets together about a week or so before. And one of the things that they talk about is including and embracing a fact of giving the campers a feeling of comfort, encouraging them where they would not necessarily excel, and giving them confidence in what they would become. So we also, Andy Friedman, to go back to him, announced that this camp would be a camp of gentlemen and merrymen. John was definitely a gentleman, and one of his best friends was Merriman. So obviously, he fit the bill as a camp director of Robin Hood. When I was at Camp Robin Hood, it was all male, all boys. 100. There was a song. 100 men of Robin Hood want victory today. Some of you may remember that song. But that was the size of the camp. And as Michael also said, in 1987, Joan and Michael and others that apparently were not in favor of adding girls, but it was John's thought, and Joan decided to add girls. There were some negatives. First of all, a number of boys from Robin Hood left. Their parents or they did not feel that they would want to be with females. However, in 1987, there were 10 female campers. My daughter happened to be the counselor, my daughter Lori happened to be the counselor in charge of those 10 girls. Among those 10 girls were my two nieces, Jennifer and Sarah King. There were also 2 Pelton girls, Pelton. They were swimmers, and I think they were sisters or twins, I'm not sure. There were 2 Nadler girls, Nadler, and 4 others. And therefore, that's what started the female addition. Talk about Andy Friedman a lot, but let me say one other thing about Andy Friedman. Andy Friedman left notices around the camp before he passed away. I think at the beginning, when he started the camp. And the notices said, Andy says, be a gentleman. Andy says, get up promptly at reveille. Andy says, there were a number of notes which Andy said. And those notes may or may not still be at camp, but I'm sure that many of you may remember that. John married his maid Marion in 2000. Although I don't question Art when he talks about the 2nd grade for Joan Buckstein, John always talked about the 4th grade. John said, I should have married her in the 4th grade. But Joan herself was an interesting lady. Joan born 5 daughters. And also, Joan was special in the way that she raised those daughters. In her nest with 5 daughters, she let 4 of them leave to go to the West Coast and never come back to Cleveland except for visits. That's why I'm saying she was very unusual. She did keep one in the nest. That was Leslie here in Cleveland. So Joan was a very special person. John wasn't outspoken and Joan was not outspoken, but they differed in many ways. Joan had very strong feelings about a number of subjects. The girls are laughing because they know I'm right, I believe. For example, Joan did not like Bob Hope. You may say, why wouldn't Joan like Bob Hope? He was first of all, he may have been from Cleveland. They said there was a whole bridge and all sort of stuff, and he was a wonderful comedian. Where Bob Hope made his big mistake when he supported the Vietnamese War. Joan found that despicable. And therefore, among the few people she strongly disliked that she verbalized about, Bob Hope was number 1 on her list. I always think of Joan and John as a puzzle, pieces of a puzzle. However, when they joined, which they did, that joint was unbreakable. It was really a true romance that if you saw in the movies, the old times, you could admire, but it was true. John, after Joan passed, never had a date with any female. He could not possibly do that. John had friends. He had his golfing buddies. John loved golf. Many of his golfing buddies are here today. He also had, I would say, possibly a group of non-golfing buddies who cherished the birthdays of one another with very, I would say, exciting birthday trips. As mentioned by Michael, John was very interested in athletics, and he supported the Brown Indians and was an original Cavalier fan as of 1970 at Richfield. John's friends sent him to fantasy camp in 1990, which he enjoyed thoroughly because John was a decent athlete. He was he very much of a pull hitter left field, though. I was a softball pitcher at camp, and if I was going to pitch to him, we'd put two people in left field because that's where he hit it. But anyway, that was that story. The best story about John's friends is when they took him at age 50 to Niagara Falls, New York. Stanley will remember this. He got married. One of our friends, Gerald Flashner, who lived in Buffalo, arranged a model to marry John. We also had the basketball coach of, I believe, Canisius University in Buffalo, who performed the ceremony. She was a very pretty girl. However, John, after the wedding, we had a party. We had it at the 747 Club, which was an airplane that would turn into a nightclub. And his bride came up to him, and John said to her, "My name's John Klein." She said, "I'm your wife." So he had wiped that out because the next day we were having his real birthday party with Joan and the rest of our Cleveland friends. Another coincidence of John and Joan. Leslie Castle, her maiden name was Leslie Klein. John's younger sister's name was Leslie. Her maiden name was Leslie Klein. I'm just throwing that out as a coincidence of fate. So, I am going to finalize this speech, believe it or not. And I'm going to finalize it with a song. First of all, I'd like all current Robin Hood personnel to rise. Now I would like all former, all former Robin Hood who attended Robin Hood to rise. I'm going to start this song, but I guarantee you that those that have risen will know this song. Far from the city's rushing streams, please join in. Far from strife and care lies the haven of our dreams, Robin Hood so fair. Robin Hood, here she lies, under skies so blue. We will ever sing thy praise. It will e'er be true. Friends, 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 we will always be. Whether in fair or in dark stormy weather, we'll stand or we'll fall together for Robin Hood. There will always be a band celebration till death separation for Robin Hood. Thank you.
May John's memory endure among us all as a blessing. In your own time, O God, when we too are called to enter eternity, may we leave this life secure in the faith that with you is the fountain of life, that in your light we shall see light. The dust returns to the earth as it was, the spirit to God who gave it. May I ask those of you who are able to please rise. El malei rachamim shochein bamromim, hamsei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashchina, im kidoshim utohorim kezohar harakim mazilim et nishmat hachaver shelanu, shehalach laolamo. Ba'al harachamim yasirehu b'seter kenefav laolamim, v'yitzur b'tzorcha chayim et nishmato. Adonai hu nachalato v'yanuach b'shalom amishkavo, v'nomar Amen. God, full of compassion, thou who dwellest on high, grant perfect rest unto the soul of John who has departed this world. Source of mercy, bring him into your presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Be thou his possession, may his repose be peace, and let us say, Amen. Please be seated. The family would like to let you know that they will receive after burial today at Steve and Leslie Katzel's home on Chagrin Highland Drive in Solon. If you can, would you join me please in the 23rd Psalm? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guideth me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And a closing thought from Chaim Potok. We live less than the time it takes to blink an eye, if we measure our lives against eternity. So it may be asked, what value is there to a human life? There is so much pain in the world. What does it mean to have to suffer so much if our lives are nothing more than the blink of an eye? I learned a long time ago that the blink of an eye in itself is nothing, but the eye that blinks, that is something. A span of life is nothing, but the person who lives the span is something. A person can fill that tiny span with meaning. Meaning is not automatically given to life. It is hard to fill one's life with meaning. But a life filled with meaning is worthy of rest.